I did, but Elvis was, he felt he was okay.
They looked like the perfect couple, Priscilla, the porcelain doll-like beauty, and Elvis, the untouchable king of rock and roll. But behind the sequins and camera flashes was a much darker reality. She had been just 14 when she met him. By the time they married, she was 21, carefully molded into the image he wanted. It was less of a marriage and more of a performance. And now, at 80, Priscilla Presley is finally breaking the illusion, speaking the truth about what really pushed her to walk away from the king, the rise of the king. Before there was Graceland, before the rhinestone suits and heartbreak hotels, Elvis Presley was just a shy boy with a guitar and a dream, tucked away in the back roads of Tupelo, Mississippi. Born on January 8, 1935, to Gladys Love and Vernon Presley, Elvis came into the world just 35 minutes after his twin brother, Jesse Garon, who was tragically stillborn. That loss lingered over the Presley household like a shadow. Elvis was close to both of his parents, but it was his bond with Gladys that would shape him for life. She became his anchor, and he became her world. The family was poor, barely scraping by. Vernon bounced between odd jobs, and food assistance from the government kept them going. When Elvis was just 3 years old, things got worse. Vernon was jailed for 8 months after forging a check, and they lost their home. It was survival mode from the start. Music came early. The family attended an Assembly of God church, and that's where he first soaked in the gospel sound that would later bleed into his signature style. By first grade in 1941, he was just another kid at East Tupelo Consolidated. Teachers called him average. But something stirred in him. At age 10, he got up on stage for the first time at the Mississippi-Alabama Fair and Dairy Show. He performed Old Shep and placed 5th. He later remembered that performance, saying he had been shy and unsure, but something inside him wanted more. That same year, he got his first guitar as a birthday gift. He didn't take lessons in any formal way. Instead, he watched. He learnt from his uncles and the pastor at his church. He once admitted he'd never felt comfortable enough to sing in public, calling himself too shy for the spotlight. But still, he practiced. In 1946, he moved to a new school, Milam, for 6th grade. That's when he started performing at school and bringing his guitar along. He was mocked for it. Kids called him trashy and said he played hillbilly music, but he kept playing. He was obsessed with a local radio show hosted by Mississippi Slim. Slim's younger brother, a classmate of Elvis, once described him as being absolutely crazy about music. Slim took notice and taught him a few chords. He even booked Elvis for 2 live on-air performances. Elvis was paralyzed by stage fright during the first one, but he pushed through and came back the next week to sing. In 1948, the family packed up and moved to Memphis. New town, new school, L.C. Humes High School. Elvis wasn't exactly the golden boy. In 8th grade, he got a C in music. His teacher even told him he didn't have a singing voice. So he showed up the next day with his guitar and sang, "Keep those cold icy fingers off me," in front of the class, proving her wrong. Still, he stayed under the radar. Some classmates teased him, calling him a mama's boy, and he rarely sang in public. But at home, he was obsessed with music. By 1950, he started practicing more seriously with Lee Denson, a neighbor, and jamming with a few local boys, 2 of whom, Dorsey and Johnny Burnett, would go on to help pioneer rockabilly. By the time he hit junior year, the boy who had once faded into the background began to stand out. It wasn't just the music, it was the look. He started growing sideburns, slicking back his hair, and wearing flashy clothes he'd admired on Beale Street. He idolized the outfits at Lansky Brothers and eventually started showing up to school dressed like he owned the place. In 1953, at Humes' annual minstrel show, Elvis finally had his moment. He sang "Till I Waltz Again with You," and the crowd was stunned. No one had known he could sing. He once said he had never been popular in school and had even failed music. But after that show, everything changed. The applause opened a door for him, one he'd been knocking on for years in secret. Elvis never learned to read music. He played everything by ear, hanging around record stores just to soak in the sounds. He was hooked on Hank Snow and obsessed with country legends like Roy Acuff, Ernest Tubb, and Jimmy Rogers. But his ballad style was heavily inspired by gospel singer Jake Hess, whose influence lingered in every slow, aching note Elvis would one day record. He often went to the all-night gospel sings downtown, where white gospel groups sang music deeply rooted in black spirituals. He absorbed it all. He didn't limit himself to country or gospel either. He tuned into Memphis radio station WDIA, one of the first to feature black music and voices. He listened to what were then called race records, blues, spirituals, and rhythm and blues with heavy backbeats. It was raw and emotional, and it stirred something in him. While he might have only been allowed into certain blues clubs on designated white nights, he soaked up the sound from the streets and the airwaves. Arthur Crudup and Rufus Thomas were among the local black musicians who left a deep impression on him. You could hear their influence when Elvis finally started recording. Their rhythms, their voices, they lived in his music. That cultural collision would later cause controversy, but for Elvis it was never about stealing, it was about becoming. By the time he graduated in June 1953, one thing was clear: music wasn't just a passion, it was his only plan. Elvis Presley's successful career. In August 1953, Elvis Presley walked into the Memphis recording service, a modest little setup run by Sam Phillips, not yet the legendary Sun Records. He wasn't there chasing fame, just a shy teenager with two songs, My Happiness and That's When Your Heartaches Begin. He said it was a birthday gift for his mother. Others believed he just wanted to hear himself on vinyl, but the choice to go to Sun said something louder than he did. He wanted in. The recordings didn't lead anywhere. He failed auditions and got turned down by bands, but Phillips remembered his voice. On July 5, 1954, something finally clicked. Elvis guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black were goofing off at the end of a dull session when Elvis broke into Arthur Crudup's That's All Right. It wasn't planned, it was raw, electric, alive. Phillips recorded it, and just like that, he'd found what he was looking for: a white kid who could channel the soul of black music. When Memphis DJ Dewey Phillips played it, the phones exploded. Listeners were convinced Elvis was black. Dewey had to ask him what high school he went to on air, coded proof he was white. 3 days later, they cut Blue Moon of Kentucky with a juke joint twist, and rockabilly was born. By late 1954, Elvis and the band were playing anywhere that would have them. They bombed at the Grand Ole Opry but caught fire at Louisiana Hayride. He was awkward at first. Then came the swagger, the hips, the screams. Teens couldn't get enough. By 1955, they added a drummer, signed with Colonel Tom Parker, and toured like mad. Radio wasn't sure what to do with him. He sounded too black for country and too country for R&B. But fans didn't care. He was called the Hillbilly Cat and the Memphis Flash. And by year's end, RCA had bought his contract for $40,000. He was 20. January 1956, RCA released Heartbreak Hotel. It was dark, strange, and unstoppable. Presley hit TV with the Dorsey Brothers, recorded his first album, and lit a fire. He wasn't polishing black music for white ears, he was reshaping it. The guitar replaced the piano, the beat hit harder. His debut album, Elvis Presley, hit #1. Blue Suede Shoes became an anthem. He played Vegas and flopped with the older crowd but scored a film contract anyway. Then came Hound Dog, The Milton Berle Show. No guitar, just Elvis and a spotlight. He slowed the beat, worked the crowd, and moved like nothing America had seen before. Headlines screamed, the press was appalled, and the girls were obsessed. By the end of 1956, Elvis wasn't just successful, he was inevitable. What started in a tiny Memphis studio had become a cultural earthquake. Elvis Presley had arrived and nothing would ever sound the same again. But for all his musical success, Presley was less successful when it came to the relationship department. Fame, fortune, and forbidden affairs. King of rock and roll and keeper of many hearts, Elvis Presley had an undeniable magnetism, and women noticed. Fame, charm, a voice that dripped southern velvet, and moves that hypnotized. He had it all. And with it came a long trail of lovers, flings, and heartbreaks that spanned decades. In the 1950s, Rita Moreno was already turning heads in Hollywood. But when she got tangled with Elvis, it wasn't about love. It was about leverage. Her real obsession was Marlon Brando, and she figured dating Presley would get Brando's attention. It worked, but not without consequence. Behind the tabloids and the glitter, she found Elvis dull. The excitement wasn't mutual. The fling fizzled out as quickly as it started. June Juanico was different. She met Elvis in 1955, and for a brief golden moment, it felt real. She wasn't some Hollywood trophy. She was grounded. someone who reminded him of where he came from. But fame has its rules, and Colonel Tom Parker had no room for true love in Elvis's itinerary. He wanted Elvis single, marketable, and surrounded by starlets, not small-town girls. The pressure got worse. Glamorous women were paraded in front of him like prizes. One even showed up at Graceland for Christmas in 1956. That was the final straw. June packed up her heart and walked. Then came Natalie Wood. It had all the makings of a studio-fueled dream romance. Young Hollywood royalty meets rising rock god. It was set up by Dennis Hopper, but the reality was far from glamorous. Wood had never seen anything like Elvis's relationship with his mother. It unnerved her. One night, she watched as he was summoned to sit on his mama's lap like a boy. That was enough. Natalie left, shaken. Whatever she thought she'd find in Elvis wasn't there. Anita Wood lasted longer, 5 years. She was a TV personality when Elvis spotted her and brought her into his world, but even she couldn't compete with what came next. The moment Priscilla Presley entered the picture, Anita knew the game was over. She didn't fight, she didn't beg. She stepped aside and let go of the man who couldn't let go of temptation. Then came Priscilla, the most defining name in his love story. Their romance began under the most controversial of circumstances. He was 24, she was 14. He was a superstar stationed in Germany. She was a teenager in pigtails. What started as quiet visits became a secret relationship. By the time she moved to the US, it was under strict instructions, not as a girlfriend, but as a carefully hidden presence in his life. He kept her isolated, shaping her image, protecting the fantasy. They married in 1967. She was 21, he was 32. Lisa Marie followed. But the marriage was a performance. Real love was buried under pills, infidelity, and long, lonely nights. In 1972, she left and took the illusion with her. But Elvis didn't stop. Even while married, he chased the thrill. Connie Stevens remembered him as one of the great loves of her life. Beautiful, thrilling, but dangerous. With Anne Helm, it was lust on a film set, hidden from the world until long after he was gone. She fell hard. He didn't. Then there was Anne Margaret. Viva Las Vegas wasn't just a movie. It was a full-blown explosion of chemistry. Off camera, it was even more electric. She never mentioned Priscilla in her memoir. Some things she knew were better left unsaid. Peggy Lipton had her own story. The dream turned sour fast. He kissed like a god, she remembered. But when it came to the bedroom, things fell apart. For her, that was the end. Barbara Lee came in with her eyes wide open. She knew the rules. She knew she wasn't the only one, but she never asked questions. She didn't need to. The time they had was enough for her. No regrets, no expectations. Then came Linda Thompson. She was a virgin when they met, but over the years, she became more than a lover. She was a caretaker, a confidant, someone who saw the cracks in his crown. She stayed longer than most, but even she couldn't survive the weight of his addictions and the ghosts that haunted him. Eventually she left, heartbroken but sure. Sheila Ryan entered next. Their eyes met backstage in Vegas while Elvis was still involved with someone else. It didn't matter. Everyone in the room felt the pull between them. But again, it didn't last. She walked away. He stayed behind, spinning. In 1975, Mindy Miller showed up. A chance meeting turned into late-night talks and unexpected emotional intimacy. They had something real until life got in the way. She returned to Italy, and the chapter closed before it could continue. His final relationship was with Ginger Alden. She was young, 21 years his junior, and the last woman to hold his heart. They got engaged, he made promises, but sadly, time ran out. He died before they could make it down the aisle. Elvis loved deeply, recklessly, and often, maybe too often. But behind every affair, every kiss that made headlines, and every woman who adored him was a man unraveling. A man still searching for peace, for control, for something that no one, not even the ones who loved him, could give. But to understand how it all began to fall apart, you have to go back to where it all started. Before the pills, before the paranoia, before the glitter turned to dust, there was Priscilla, the one woman who had been there before the chaos, before the crown weighed too heavily on the king's head. The girl who saw the man behind the music before the world did. The real reason Priscilla divorced Elvis. Before the heartbreaks, before the scandals, before the electrifying hips and the "you ain't nothing but a hound dog" fame, There was Priscilla. Long before the screaming fans and the glitter of Graceland, she was just a quiet, shy girl with no sense of belonging, until Elvis Presley walked into her life and changed everything. Priscilla Ann Wagner was born on May 24, 1945, at Brooklyn Naval Hospital. Her life began in the shadow of loss. Just 5 months after her birth, her father, a Navy pilot, died in a plane crash. Her mother eventually remarried, and Priscilla took the surname of her stepfather, becoming a Beaulieu. Military life kept them constantly on the move. Connecticut, New Mexico, Maine, and Texas. A new home every few years meant new schools, new friends, and repeated goodbyes. She saw herself as a pretty but uncertain little girl, never quite grounded, always feeling out of place. In 1956, the family landed in Del Valle, Texas. Priscilla tried to settle in, but soon came another transfer, this time to West Germany. She was devastated. New country, new language, new faces, no roots, no rhythm. But fate has a strange way of working. It was there, in Bad Nauheim, that everything changed. On September 13, 1959, at a party in a rented villa, 14-year-old Priscilla walked into a room and caught the attention of none other than Elvis Presley, then 24 and already a global sensation. Something about her shook him. She made him awkward and nervous, emotions rare for a man so used to being the center of gravity. But he recovered quickly, turned on his famous charm, and by the end of the night, he was completely taken. Her parents were livid when she came home late that night. They forbade her from seeing him again. But Elvis wasn't backing down. He made solemn promises. He would be respectful, he would follow their rules, he would be a gentleman. Eventually, they relented. And with that, Priscilla was pulled into a world no teenage girl could have dreamed of. For the next 6 months, their relationship bloomed in secret, quiet, intense, and deeply romantic. But in March 1960, Elvis left Germany, and with him, he took Priscilla's heart. Back home, rumors swirled. Nancy Sinatra, Anita Wood, other women. Priscilla felt forgotten and discarded. But then came the letters, then the phone calls, and in the summer of 1962, the invitation that changed everything arrived. Come visit him in Los Angeles. Her parents only agreed under a long list of conditions: daily letters home, adult chaperones at all times, and a first-class round-trip ticket. Elvis agreed to everything. What her parents didn't know was that the letters they received were written in advance and mailed out by his staff while Priscilla was swept away to Las Vegas. That trip to Vegas shattered any illusions. She was introduced to the chaos of Elvis's real world. Pills to stay awake, pills to sleep, all-night parties, relentless schedules, and flashing lights. A man constantly burning at both ends. Still, she came back. Christmas followed, then another visit. And by spring of 1963, she was moving to Memphis. She wasn't even 18. Her parents only agreed to the move under one major condition. Elvis had to promise he'd marry her one day. She was to live with his father and stepmother a few streets away from Graceland and finish high school at a Catholic girls' school. Elvis agreed, but gradually, the lines began to blur. Priscilla started sleeping at Graceland. Her belongings moved in. Quietly, without much ceremony, she became part of the Presley household. She began to dream of Hollywood, of having her own voice and her own life. But Elvis was adamant. She was to stay in Memphis. He was too busy, he claimed. It wasn't the right time. Meanwhile, the tabloids had no trouble tracking him. Photos of him and Viva Las Vegas co-star Anne Margaret were splashed everywhere. When Priscilla confronted him, he dismissed it as publicity and insisted it was all fake, just gossip to promote the movie. But this would become a pattern. New co-stars, new rumors, same denials. Priscilla kept quiet, not because she believed him, but because she feared what would happen if she called his bluff. Then, in December 1966, came the ring. To some, it was a romantic proposal. To others, it looked more like damage control, pressure from RCA, concern over public image, maybe even a morality clause kicking in. But regardless of motive, she said yes. Their wedding took place on May 1, 1967, at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. It lasted 8 minutes. There was a press conference, a $10,000 breakfast reception, and a room full of business associates. Most of Elvis's closest friends were left off the guest list. Resentments bloomed that day, and many never healed. They honeymooned in Palm Springs, then escaped to their private ranch in Mississippi. Just the two of them. No staff, no media, no chaos. For 3 weeks, they played house in peace. It was the happiest Priscilla had ever been. She would later call those days a fantasy. Back in Memphis, they threw a second reception at Graceland for those who had been excluded from the Vegas wedding. There were smiles, photos, and celebration. But beneath it all, the cracks had already started to show. Soon after, Priscilla discovered she was pregnant. She wasn't ready, not because she didn't want a baby, but because she feared what it might take away. They had just begun to reclaim something intimate, something close. She'd asked Elvis about birth control before, but he dismissed it, saying it wasn't safe. For a brief moment, they even considered abortion. But in the end, they both knew they couldn't go through with it. 9 months to the day after their wedding, on February 1st, 1968, Lisa Marie Presley was born. To the world, they were perfect, the king, his queen, and their beautiful daughter. But inside the gates of Graceland, the illusion was cracking wide open. Elvis was spiraling, deeper into pills and deeper into paranoia. Priscilla was left to raise Lisa mostly on her own. Hollywood never stopped calling him, and neither did temptation. The affairs were no longer rumors, they were fact, and she stopped pretending not to know. But Priscilla had changed too. She was no longer just Elvis's girl. She was a wife, a mother, and slowly, a woman waking up to a painful truth. She had spent years trying to fit inside someone else's dream. The fairy tale had always carried shadows, but now those shadows were deeper, darker, colder, and impossible to ignore. And Priscilla had reached a point where she could no longer live in them. She stayed at first. She tried to hold on, but the damage had already been done. The pills, the constant affairs, the unraveling loyalty, it all wore her down. What finally sealed the deal was the complete breakdown of trust. In February 1972, following her affair with her karate instructor Mike Stone, Priscilla told Elvis she was leaving the marriage. The relationship with Stone hadn't come out of nowhere. It was born out of years of betrayal. Elvis hadn't been faithful either. Speaking years later on the Australian news program Sunday Night, Priscilla revealed he wasn't faithful. Not that he had someone special, but when you're in the entertainment business, there is always that. And I tried to turn my back on that, but I just didn't want to share him. Simple as that. The breakup hit Elvis hard. His longtime friend, songwriter Mae Boren Axton, told people that it wasn't just a blow to his pride. It wounded him deeply. It hurt his ego, and it hurt his heart. The divorce was finalized on August 15, 1972. As part of the settlement, Priscilla received $1.7 million, along with $8,000 per month in support for 10 years. Yet despite the end of their marriage, the connection between them didn't fade. In fact, in many ways, it remained just as strong. Charlie Hodge, Elvis's vocal coach and close friend, told people that even after the split, they were like two high school kids. He described how they would still call each other constantly, sharing updates, making each other laugh, and confiding everything. The romance may have ended, but the bond, messy, complicated, but real, never truly disappeared. But time, fame, and pain have a way of catching up. And as the years wore on, that same magnetic man Priscilla once fell for, so full of swagger, fire, and raw talent, began to fade. Behind the sequins and the spotlight, Elvis was crumbling. He'd survived the divorce, but he couldn't survive himself. How Elvis's drug use led to his tragic death. About 47 years ago, millions of fans around the world were hit with a gut punch. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was dead. He was just 42. Not the sleek, hip-swinging heartthrob who once turned teenage girls into mush with a glance, but a bloated, exhausted version of the man he used to be. The spark was gone, and now, so was he. It was his girlfriend, Ginger Alden, who found him face down on the bathroom floor of his Graceland mansion, unconscious, lifeless. The once golden boy of Memphis had died alone in the most humiliating of ways. Paramedics rushed him to Baptist Memorial Hospital. Not the closest hospital, but the one with a reputation for keeping secrets. It didn't matter. The doctors tried, but there was nothing left to revive. At 3:30 p.m., Elvis Aaron Presley was officially pronounced dead. Back at Graceland, the bathroom cabinet told its own story. Dozens of amber-colored vials with white caps. Pills for everything: pain, sleep, stress, energy. Doses no legitimate doctor would dare sign off on. But Elvis hadn't been living in reality for years, and neither had the people around him. Later that evening, a team of pathologists, doctors Eric Muirhead, Jerry Francisco, and Noel Floredo, spent 2 hours performing the autopsy. But at 8 p.m., only one of them, Dr. Francisco, stepped up to face the press. Without waiting for consensus from the others, he blurted out a half-truth. Preliminary autopsy findings showed Elvis had died from cardiac arrhythmia. No mention of drugs, no cause for scandal. It was a lie. The truth was uglier. But Elvis's family had begged for a cover-up, desperate to protect what was left of his image. After all, how do you explain that the same man who once shook hands with President Nixon and received a badge from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs had become a full-blown pharmaceutical junkie? Weeks later, the toxicology report exposed it all. Elvis's blood was a cocktail of hardcore substances: Dilaudid, Demerol, Percodan, Quaaludes, codeine, you name it. His body was a ticking time bomb. The autopsy also uncovered other damage: severe constipation, diabetes, and glaucoma. Elvis wasn't just sick, he was falling apart. In the end, his death was shockingly ordinary. Elvis had been on the toilet, straining to have a bowel movement. The pressure triggered a heart attack. That's how the king of rock and roll died. Collapsed on the bathroom floor, pants around his ankles, pills in his system, alone. But the constipation wasn't just an unfortunate side effect. It was chronic, intense, and dangerous, brought on by years of opiate abuse. Painkillers might have numbed his body, but they also stopped it from working. He took pills to wake up, pills to fall asleep, pills to eat, and others to get through the night. And somewhere in the mix were stacks of laxatives, trying to undo what the rest of the drugs had caused. At the center of this pharmaceutical circus was Dr. George Nichopoulos, known as Dr. Nick. He had been at Elvis's side for nearly a decade, supposedly treating him for saddle pain in the late 60s. But very quickly, that turned into something darker. Dr. Nick became the enabler-in-chief. Under oath, he admitted it himself: thousands of pills, bottles of sedatives, uppers and downers, and occasionally a few sugar pills to trick Elvis into thinking he was getting his fix. His defense? He was just trying to keep Elvis from scoring drugs off the street. He claimed he cared. Somehow, the jury bought it. Dr. Nick walked free, labeled by some as a misguided carer instead of a reckless pusher. In 1980, he was charged again for overprescribing, not just to Elvis, but also to Jerry Lee Lewis. Once again, he was acquitted, but the recklessness didn't stop. Years later, the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners finally pulled the plug. In 1995, his medical license was permanently revoked. Too little, too late. And then came the theories. The armchair experts and a few scientists who claimed to have tested a lock of his hair. Some pointed to a genetic heart condition, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a thickened heart muscle. They said it could explain the fainting spells, the fatigue, and the high blood pressure. But when you look at the full picture, his size, his habits, the drugs, the constant pressure, the terrible diet of fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches. Do you really need a rare disease to explain what happened? Elvis wasn't just a victim of genetics or bad luck. He was a man chewed up and spat out by fame, surrounded by yes-men, and trapped in a lifestyle that didn't leave room for help or honesty. Like Michael Jackson, like Prince. Another icon was a personal doctor who handed out prescriptions like candy until the music stopped. And in the end, Elvis died not just from a heart attack or drugs or constipation, but from being Elvis, from the weight of who he had to be every single day. He died a lonely man, locked inside a mansion that had turned into his personal heartbreak hotel. And the fans who had once screamed his name were left grieving the man they thought they knew, and the truth they never saw coming. Do you think Priscilla made the right choice by walking away? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.